Hello, my chess friends. We are here for another episode of How to Think in Chess for Beginners. I really want to thank you for all of the views and likes for the last two episodes. So let's keep it going. And in today's episode, I'm going to be playing one of the advanced bots, Isabel, which is rated 1600. And I'm going to try to play a different opening than I usually play to give you guys different positions to look at, and hopefully using the logic and reasoning and principles of chess that we've been talking about, I'll still be able to do okay. Okay, so I have the white pieces today, and the description says that Isabel is good at the endgame. So we'll see if we get there. Of course, I'm going to try to play as well as I can and try to explain the reasoning behind each of my moves. So I'm going to start out with d4. Lately, I've been starting out with e4, but let's try d4. I have played d4 in the past, and there's a lot of different options here. So d4 is a little different than e4 because here, when this knight prevents me from playing e4 right away, but what I want to do is try to at least make it a little harder for him to play d5. So typically the best move is c4, but there's a lot of good moves here, including moves like bishop to f4, bishop to g5, and knight to f3. But let's play c4 again with following our first principle of trying to control the center. Okay, our opponent plays e6, and again, trying to control this d5 square, but also this frees this bishop to come out here, for example. Now, if I play knight to c3, we will be entering an opening called the Nimzo-Indian Defense. It's very tricky, but, well, maybe I should go ahead and try it. The next logical move here is knight to c3. Another good move here is knight to f3. But let's play knight to c3 and let's see if our opponent goes into this. And yes, our opponent goes into the Nimzo-Indian. So what is the idea here? The idea is that this knight is pinned and black will threaten to bring his knight, or her knight, I guess in this case, to e4 to attack the c3 knight. Now, there's a lot of ways to fight against this. I'm going to play the only one I really know sort of well that I used to play, which is queen to c2. This is also, I think this is known as the Capablanca variation. But the idea is that if black were to play bishop takes c3, we can take back with the queen, not necessarily with the pawn, although sometimes we take back with the pawn anyway. Okay, black strikes back with d5. And d5, of course, threatening to take this pawn, but also trying to exert control in the center so that this knight maybe can come in. Couple ideas here that I want to think about. One is to attack his bishop right away and force this trade. The second is to, let me clear some of these arrows. The second is to play something like e3 to free this bishop so that I can play something like bishop to d3. And the other one is to just develop my knight. And then if he comes here with this knight, knowing that I have two protectors on here and I'm okay. So here, actually, I'm going to play a3. Maybe trying to be a little more aggressive and force him to make a choice. Okay, here I played queen to c2 so that I could take back. Now he will be able to attack me here with the knight, and then I can just move my queen out of the way. So here, queen takes c3, and knight to e4 is played, attacking my queen. So here, I'm just going to bring my queen. Well, there's a few choices here. I'm just making sure I'm not going to be falling for any threats here. I think I will just move it back to c2. Moving it to like f3 is also an option, but then this pawn is no longer defended. So I'm going to move it back here to queen to c2. I'm not sure what the proper move is, but sometimes we shouldn't have to worry about that too much. Okay. Well, here my center is being attacked again with c5 attacking the d4 pawn, and well, there's a few choices. I can defend it with e3. I could defend it with knight to f3, or I can defend it with bishop to e3, which by the way is probably not such a good idea because it's blocking this pawn, which I might want to move later so that I can get my bishop out. But that might be an option as well. Also, I can take on c5. Now, if I take on c5, black can try, can basically take back with the knight, which actually that might be okay. I'm not quite sure though. I feel like I want to try to keep a pawn in the center. So I'm thinking of e3. But then, of course, that blocks this bishop, which means I'll have to plan on developing this bishop elsewhere. So that's always something you need to think about when you push these center pawns. But let's see. Let's go ahead and I don't see any danger in playing e3. It does free my other bishop, but I will need to worry about developing this bishop later. Okay. Well, here we have queen to a5 check. I am safe against that, but I do feel bad. I didn't consider that as an option on this move. But what I think I can just do is play bishop to d2. Of course, I will be giving up my dark square bishop, but that's okay because, remember, these pawns are in the way of the bishop anyway. So this is what they technically call a bad bishop. And we could go more into that some other time. Actually, I'll explain a little now. When your pawns are on the same square as the bishop, it's considered a bad bishop. And a couple ways to deal with that. One is to get the bishop out before you put the pawns on the square, which we did not do in this case. The other way is to offer it to trade or to trade it off. And the third way is to try to eventually prepare some type of pawn break in order to advance the pawns off of the color of the square. So in this case, I'm going to defend with bishop to d2, offering this trade. And now with this, I will not be able to castle, so I do have to consider that. But I think that is if he captures on d2, which she does. Okay, so I take back with the king, and now we will see what happens. Okay, he takes on d4. I pretty much have to take back, and now, depending on what he does, this could be a little tricky for me. So let's take a look at this position. A couple trades have happened. It's always good whenever there's a lot of exchanges or a big change in the position to just kind of slow down and take a look at what's happening. So let's do a quick assessment here. In this case, material is even. And when it comes to, so when we're assessing things, we talk about the material, how many pieces we have on the board. So in this case, it's even. We could then talk about things like the pawn structure. So in this case, we see that, and control of the center, for example. In this case, black can take here and inflict what's called an isolated pawn on me. Okay, I can also take here, and if he takes back, we'll both have isolated pawns. Isolated pawns are pawns that don't have pawns of its own color on the adjacent files. So right now there are no isolated pawns, but if there's a couple captures, there could be. Excuse me. So we want to think about that when we're planning. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along with this game. Here, we can also talk about king safety. Now, black still has the option to castle and tuck her queen away, while I do not anymore. However, the my opponent, black, does not have as much material on because we have had several trades, right? Two minor pieces and the queen have been traded off. So even though my king is in the center, there's a little less risk of of my queen or of my king getting into danger. So in this case, there is an immediate threat, and that is the knight taking on d4. I can ignore it or I can protect it. If I ignore it, I might want to play a move like pawn takes d5. And then if the pawn takes back, um, then I would still have to defend this. Also, if I take here, black can ignore it and take on d4. In which case, can take on d4 and then actually threaten like a fork like this. So I think it makes sense for me to try to protect this pawn in the center and also to gain a little more central control. There's two ways I can do it, with the knight and with the king. Well, I still need to develop these pieces, and I'm not quite sure where I want to put the king yet, so I'm going to play this knight to f3, protecting the pawn. Okay. Here, my opponent plays f6. So, couple thoughts here. He could be preparing to push this, which is actually would be okay for me. Um, that would actually be okay for me because I could get rid of these potentially weak pawns. The other thing I could do here is actually just capture here. This would clarify the center. It would kind of make it equivalent in the center, and also would put, if she captures back, put this pawn on d5, which would make, hinder his bishop a little bit. So I think that's what I'm going to do. This would resolve the center a little bit. Also maybe make this move a little silly looking. Although it does serve another purpose. It does prevent my knight from getting here. So it is a decent move in that respect. Okay, now I can develop my bishop, which is what I think I want to do. Actually, a couple things here. I can actually play a move like rook to e1 check. And why would I want to do that is that she would have to block and potentially lose the right to castle. So that's one consideration. The other consideration is to just develop my bishop and try to get my rooks in play that way. It might mean allowing my opponent to castle, but might be a good idea. Well, actually, now on second thought, maybe hitting him with this check might be useful to disrupt my opponent's development. Because, for example, if the knight is brought back here, then I can go something like b to b5 check. Now, of course, you can block with the bishop. So, in some ways, this might not be so good as well. So let me just consider for a moment. If I don't play rook to e1 check, what would I play? Well, I need to develop this bishop. A couple of good spots would be here and here. Now, I kind of like this bishop to b5 move because one idea would be to then bring this rook out to the e file and this rook to the c file. So your rooks want these open files so they have more room to maneuver. And the perfect spot for these rooks would be on our opponent's 7th rank. But we're a little far from that, but that's kind of what we're aiming for. So actually now looking at it, bishop to b5 might be better here because this rook to e1 check, although it might disrupt black's ability to castle, is more of a short-term threat without really as much long-term return. The other threat is also to just capture here and create a pawn weakness for my pieces to attack. Okay, bishop to b5 is what I'm going to play. Okay, and then another idea behind that is to maneuver around here. So I have a decision to make. One idea is to actually capture here on c6. That would cause my opponent to recapture with the pawn, most likely. And then what I could do is play a move like b4. That would lock this pawn in place if she doesn't want to lose the pawn, and then I can attack it with my rooks. Or I could attack it right away, which is probably what I would consider doing here. But I do want to, my opponent is threatening to bring this rook here to e8, for example. So I might want to put my rook there first. So let me consider. It might be good to wait to decide on this move because right now this knight isn't doing anything too dangerous. There is one more thing I want to consider, is that this bishop can now also come out to g4 and threaten my knight. The reason why I might want to prevent this is that this knight is protecting this pawn. So, couple moves to consider: taking on c6, preventing, like with h3, preventing this knight from being captured, or bringing my rook to e1. One thought I have is, if I bring my rook to e1, does that actually help in terms of maybe I can use that to bring my rook up this way and then capture here so there wouldn't be a threat here anymore. That is one consideration. So let me think. And now you have your options. What you want to do next is compare them by doing some calculation. Okay, so let's start with this. Bishop takes c6. The logical move here for black would be b takes c6. And then I think probably I'd want to attack right away with rook to c1. And there, the only move to protect, or the only two moves, would be to put the bishop here. So that would actually tie down my opponent's bishop, which might be a good thing. I could follow that up with bringing my rook in, and maybe even maneuvers bringing my knight to this square. So that would be an attractive option, I think. So that would be okay, I think. And that would be sort of this battle between the bishop and the knight. Bringing the rook over to e1, maybe I would expect my opponent to either bring her rook to e8, but maybe this threat here of bishop to g4. So how do I deal with that? So rook to e1, bishop to g4. So maybe at that point, that's where I capture here on c6 first, and probably will want to capture first, and then bring my rook here to e3. And that way, this particular threat can be negated that way. So I think I kind of like that idea. The reason why is this h3 move, although it prevents bishop to g4, it's kind of a waste otherwise, because black can bring her bishop here too, and that would be a fine square. So rook to e1 actually I think has the most utility right now. I do like bishop takes c6 too, but I don't need to necessarily play it right away. So here, my opponent played bishop to f5 anyway. Okay, so here we want to consider how to proceed, and I think a logical way would just be to bring my other rook into the game, seeing that there's no real, well, there is another threat. Now, this could be a threat, which is bishop to e4. But in that case, I still have this capture here. So let's go ahead and bring our rook in. The other idea, of course, is to bring it here to attack this pawn. Okay, so my opponent defends the knight. And actually, I think I'm going to continue to try to go on the offensive maybe with a move like rook to c5. The reason why this move could be effective is that um, b6 attacking does not work because I can win the knight. And then also I'm threatening to double up on the c file. So I actually like that move. Uh, Couple things. Let's think about what can black play. We always want to think how will black respond to our move. A couple logical ways. Rook to c5, then this knight can actually come back here to e7 to defend the pawn. And then my rook would be attacked also. In that case, I can actually bring my other rook over, and then if my opponent takes, I actually have the choice of actually taking with the d pawn and getting rid of this pawn weakness. The other way would be bishop to e4, protecting the pawn. And again, this threat would be happening. In that case, though, I think I can capture here. And then if he captures back with the rook, for example, or with the pawn, I can actually bring my other rook over or bring my rook up here to defend my knight. In both cases, my pawn will be protected here on d4. Okay, so actually I like that move. I'm going to go ahead and play it. And bishop to e4 is played. Okay, now I have a consideration to make here. Do I double up on the file here, or do I take this knight? Or do I move? Well, I don't think moving this knight is that good at this point. But let's see. If I play rook to c1, then black can take. And then if I take back, then this move can be played. Knight takes d4. And the problem with that now is that there's a few things that are threatened, I think. This knight fork, which would fork this. Well, of course, my bishop's also being threatened. So I'm in a little bit. That would be a little troublesome already. So that's if I just play rook to c1, bishop takes f3, g takes f3, knight takes d4, and then let's say I play rook takes c8, then this move can happen, which is knight to b3 check. Actually, that wouldn't necessarily be so bad, I don't think. King to d3, for example. Oh, no, not king to d3. Maybe king to e3. And then if white takes back with the knight, I actually can bring my rook back, and I will be back. I'll be up a piece. So that actually works. So rook to c1 actually could work. Let's calculate that one more time. Rook to c1, bishop takes f3, g takes f3, knight takes d4. Oh, knight takes d4, and then rook takes c8. Now, instead of rook, black can also take here. Knight takes b5, but then I would just take the other rook. And then the other option, of course, would be taking this rook. I would take back, and then the knight takes here, in which case I would be up the exchange, and I think I would be winning pretty handily there. So rook to c1 actually is an okay move, I think, if my calculations are correct. The other one is bishop takes c6. The problem, if he takes back here, then I can double up and win the c pawn. But if my opponent takes back with the rook, then I think I would be forced to take with the rook, and then I would um, maybe not get as much pressure here. So I don't really like this move as much because it's kind of a move late because then this rook can come back in and defend. So let's try rook to c1. Hopefully my calculations are correct. Okay, and knight to e7 is played, which is perfectly fine for me. So here, a couple things. Um, I can liquidate here, which not sure if how good that would be. I think keeping the tension and letting him capture would actually be better for me. Okay. The other thing here is, let's see here. Um, so I could actually do maybe something more useful, such as playing b4, which would help to reinforce. And then if he does capture, I capture back with the pawn. This pawn remains weak, and I can go about attacking that. So I think b4 is the move to play here. Let me just see if there's any other threats. Of course, if I play b4 and he takes here, I just take back with the pawn. Of course, black can come back here and threaten. But in this particular position, if black moves his knight away, I can actually win some material here. So I think I will play b4. Okay, the rook comes back to protect. And now I can continue. So as you can see here, um, except for the bishop on e4, all of black's pieces are sort of passive. And I think what I can do here is actually play rook to c3 with the idea of now attacking the 7th rank. This is often very favorable to put your rook on the 7th rank because there's a lot of targets, as you can see in this particular position. Um, Also, this rook restrains this king, and in this particular case also pins this knight. Now, black will probably want to try to contest it, in which case I can actually capture a pawn because my rook here is protected. So I'm going to go ahead and play rook to c7. Okay, here my opponent protects, and you can see my opponent's position's getting a little bit passive. I want to start considering how to continue with this position. What I think I'm actually going to do is maybe bring my bishop, try to find a way to improve my bishop. Well, one thing I could do is actually try to trade off the bishop because this bishop is black's best piece at the moment, and all of the rest of black's pieces are passively defending. So I think that's what I'm going to do. And then my knight can be free to move. Okay, here my opponent makes an interesting move, just moves the king out of the way so this knight can move. So I need to consider what to do next here. If I take, I don't think that's such a great move because now we get into the issue of black taking with the pawn, and now my pawn is weak. So we don't want that necessarily. What we can do is maybe we can leave this tension here because anytime he wants to take here, that's fine. And also anytime he wants to take here, that is fine as well. I can actually maybe bring this rook here and put a little pressure on this pawn. Of course, you could play b6, but this would actually weaken the position, and then I could just move my rook away. So let's poke a little bit at the position and see what happens. Okay, so interestingly, my opponent moves the rook defensively here to defend the knight. This is where actually I'm thinking I can maybe start to put a little more pressure by actually putting both of my rooks on the 7th rank. Well, let's see. Black would have to respond, and I'd probably end up trading a little bit. For example, if I go rook to e7, excuse me, probably would either play rook to c8 or rook to d8. And at that point, I could just bring my other rook to protect it. So I think we'd be okay there. The other thing, though, actually, if I did that, one move that can be played is this knight to c6. And that would lock off this rook from the protection of the other rook. But if black tries to do that, then I could actually just play bishop to b5 and pinning the knight and trying to capture it. So, actually, is bishop to b5 a good move right now? Bishop to b5, maybe. Then if the rook goes back to e8, I still don't really have a great follow up from there. So I think rook to e8 is, or rook to d7 is the move to make here. Okay, and my opponent is just allowing me to do this. This move I don't think was so great. I think white had to contest because now I can bring my other rook in. Hopefully I'm not falling for some big trap. Okay, and here my opponent is threatening to take this pawn after taking here. So I can win a pawn here, but the question is, should I? Actually, the interesting thing is this would not be so great because I think I would just end up winning a lot of material. Um, but let's think about it. The threat is bishop takes f3, g takes f3, and then knight takes d4. One other, so that's the main threat. And my threats, I can actually take here on b7 and win a pawn. But then that would, well, it might not happen because actually if bishop takes f3, g takes f3, well, the rook can actually just take here at any time, and then we'd have the same issues. Um, the problem is this pawn would be hanging too. So actually, I don't know if I need to fear anything. I think I can just. One crazy idea that came into my mind was to play g4, and then if bishop takes, then pawn takes, and actually in this case, um, black would be in a lot of trouble. But the knight can actually can the knight do anything? The knight can go back here, and then I can move my knight out of the way. So that would be one option. Um, and then again, there is the option here. So just making sure this is safe. Let me just calculate it one more time. Rook takes b7, bishop takes f3, g takes f3, say rook takes, bishop takes, and then knight takes here and threatening here. Um, this actually looks a little dangerous because this pawn is now the pawn that was on f3 would now be threatened. So even if I won another pawn here, then black can take with check, and this can be a little tricky for me. I think I'd have to be kind of careful here. But I still think I'd be okay. My g4 move actually feels a little interesting and crazy in a crazy way. No, actually, no, it doesn't. Actually, I'm seeing it now because after knight to h6, now that pawn is certain, and this knight is still hanging. So one always double check those ideas. The other move is just to wait and maybe improve another piece because the issue here is that black can't really do too much without losing material. Um, if he takes, I can wait here because this rook would still be threatening here. And if this knight ever leaves here, for example, here, then I have this check. So actually a move I'm seeing now, which might be interesting, is h3. because then my g4 idea might work next move. So let's try that. I don't think there's any way I'm losing in this position. Okay, so my opponent is going to trade on d3, and actually that plays right into my hand, I believe. Now I can take back, and here my opponent is in a bit of trouble. So I can force my opponent back now with g4. And if my opponent goes here, for example, then I'm going to deliver this check. If my opponent goes there, can't checkmate yet, but I can take this pawn threatening that knight. And now that knight's going to be in a lot of trouble. And that knight is also the one that's protecting against checkmate. So here we can play g4. Okay, the knight goes back, and here I'm going to hit the king with the check. Okay, can't checkmate yet, but I can take here, and now I'm threatening checkmate. Well, almost checkmate here, but I'm also threatening this knight. I'm going to take. So now, again, we are in a position we're about to win material and about to have a totally winning position. Let's take our time and see, make sure there's no crazy stuff going on here. This pawn is only threatening here on b4, and we don't need to really worry about that too much. So if I take this knight, I'll be a piece ahead, and these rooks don't really have any good entry spots here that aren't covered. And I'm not worried about trading down any rooks at this point because I'm up a lot of material. Besides, I'm also threatening checkmate right here. Okay, so my opponent blocks the checkmate, but what I'm going to do is, well, let's see, what's the best way to do this? If I check here, then the king will go here, and I can actually take this with check first, but then he would take my rook. So I'd be a piece up still. Or I can take this rook. Or I can just take this rook and then take this pawn, which I think may be the easier thing to do. Okay? So I'm going to win another pawn. And again, when we're ahead in material, as long as our opponent there's no attack, threats against our king, then we should just go ahead and trade down material. Okay? Here we're up a piece and a couple pawns. And so now, just like we've done in the past, we want to improve our pieces that are not, we'll say, optimized. And so here, what am I going to do here? So my opponent might try to come in over here. So I'm actually going to bring my knight this way and try to get right there. Okay? So my opponent, I didn't think about this too much. My opponent is going to win this pawn back. But I think what I'm going to do is, let's see here. I think I'm going to give up that pawn and just go after this pawn with my rook. Okay, so I'm going to put him in check. And now go after this pawn. Okay, he takes this pawn. I'm in check, so I need to defend. I'm just going to move this pawn up. This knight's protecting it, and then I'm going to grab his pawn. Okay, I'm going to take this pawn here. Again, this position's totally winning. Nothing really to fear here. And then here, I'm going to block off this king. So now this king can't cross, and I'm going to start pushing my pawn. Okay, my opponent is going to bring this rook back. So what I'm going to do is, let's see, how should we handle this? Well, let's push the pawn. Okay, and now I'm just going to bring my knight to a better spot where I can attack. So I'm going to play my knight. I think what I'm going to do is go here, and then either here or here. So I'll bring my knight to attack. Okay, trying to blockade the pawn. And again, this is a situation where you want to learn to deal with. Now there, I could have actually traded off rooks, which would have been made things easier. But in this case, I'll just go ahead and take this pawn. Okay, and I'm going to bring the rook back here, and then I'm going to actually put my knight. Let's see here. Well, actually here I'm just going to bring my king over to protect the pawn so that I can move my rook. And again, a lot of options here because we're winning. I can advance my pawn now. Okay, the blockade is on. And I can protect my pawn using my king this time because I can just bring my king around. Now, again, I have this option to trade rooks, and this time I'm going to take it. So I fork the two pieces. Okay, takes back, and then I'm giving back a pawn. But in this case, I'm going to bring my king over, and this is another educational moment. I put my king in opposition to my opponent's king, so my opponent cannot bring his king closer, okay, or towards my pieces. And here, I'm just going to put my knight in this position, blocking this pawn, and eventually, my king is going to run out. My opponent's king is going to run out of space, and then I can outflank and then win this pawn. And in these situations, it's just easy to promote one of your pawns, make a queen, and then checkmate using the queen and king technique that we know. Okay? Here I don't care about the one pawn. And again, we always have to make sure that we're not going to stalemate the king here. So if I move my queen up, the king has plenty of squares to move. So I make a queen. And here we start to cut down on the space that our opponent's king can go. So here I'm going to, I'm just going to bring my queen here. And actually I'm going to advance this pawn so that my queen covers this whole rank. And now I'm going to use the method where I put it a knight's move away. And then once the king is on one of the sides, or on one of the back ranks, then you just cut it off with the queen, so it's stuck there on that side, and then I just bring my king into checkmate. And there's a few ways to checkmate, but I will pick the easy one. Okay, and there we are. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, hit that like button down below and leave a comment. Let me know what you thought or if you had a question. And if you aren't already, please subscribe to the channel. And I hope to see you next time. Talk to you soon. Bye.